If you use a Sony camera for filming, then you're gonna want the best quality image. And the start of the process to get the best quality image starts with choosing the correct picture profile. Now in the Sony world, there's two very popular picture profiles, S-Log3 and S-Cinetone. But which one is right for you? In this video, we're going to be diving into the pros and cons of both of them picture profiles. And in my opinion, which one of those you should use and when you should use it. And you may be actually surprised by what I'm going to tell you. Now, these two picture profiles are literally worlds apart. The end result of these profiles look great, however, the differences are huge. So let's start with S-Cinetone. Now this profile easily looks the best straight out of camera. What you're seeing right now is the footage straight out of camera, and to get it to wherever you want, if you do want to change it, you barely have to do much with it. It's a very contrasty, saturated image straight out of camera, but because of that, it has the least amount of dynamic range between the two profiles, with this only having around about 10 to 11 stops. And if you don't know what dynamic range is, a camera with more dynamic range will allow you to capture the brightest parts of the image and the darkest parts of the image without losing too much detail. The more of that you have, theoretically, the better the image quality will be. And you'll see easily in some of the footage that sometimes you do have to choose as to whether you're going to retain the highlights or the shadows. You can still save a fair bit, but it's a lot less forgiving than what S-Log3 is. S-Log3 is the flattest profile you can get out of the current Sony cameras. And when you take the footage straight out of camera and view it, it looks really grey, no contrast, no saturation. It's really, really lifeless. But because of that flat look, it does mean that you have more dynamic range, so you get around about 14 to 15 stops with S-Log3. So you certainly have more chance of being able to capture and retain the highlight information and the shadows. But this grey image you're seeing right now is definitely not how you want your final image to look. S-Log3, like other log profiles in the world, does need some correction to make it look more natural. Taking the image from being very grey, bland and boring and bringing a little bit of life into it. Now to do that, it does require a little bit of understanding as to how a log profile works. And correcting it from scratch with no help can take a fair bit of time and can be a bit of a pain in the rear end. Or you can use correction LUTs, which will do most of the work for you. However, if you've shot the footage wrong, well, but that's the thing you see, you can't just expose your image to be around 0 on the back of the camera, but we'll come to that shortly. Now the great thing about S-Cinetone is what you see on the back of the camera is pretty much what you get out of the camera. I've used S-Cinetone many times before. In fact, the first time I ever bought my Sony A7S Mark III, I didn't know how to shoot log. I had a little bit of experience using it with my A7 III, but I always found that the results I got out of camera was nothing like what I actually wanted. I was definitely not confident in shooting in log. So to save myself the hassle later on and having to go out there and just reshoot everything, I decided to shoot in S-Cinetone. I've used it for vlogs, I've used it for videos on the channel, I've used it for client work, I've even shot weddings using S-Cinetone. S-Cinetone is so useful when you just need to film something, take it off the memory card, put it into a sequence as quick as possible, and hand it off to a client or post it somewhere. And with using S-Cinetone, you can expose your footage at around 0 to +1 stop. At the moment, I'm at +0.3. You can just go off the light meter or just go off what your eye is telling you, and anytime I have to hand my camera off to somebody to film any behind the scenes footage for the channel or just film in general, show them how to increase the brightness of the footage or darken the footage if they need to, and 99% of the time they nail it. But S-Log3 is a little bit trickier. S-Log3 naturally has to be overexposed higher than what S-Cinetone would be. And you do that to be able to get rid of as much noise as possible and to make it look as natural as possible. But how much overexposed do you really have to make that footage? Is it 1 stop, 2 stops, sometimes more? That exposure value very much depends on what is in your image. If you've got a lot of dark stuff like my jacket, then your exposure value will come down slightly, even though you're not decreasing the actual exposure. And unless you're using a monitoring LUT on your camera, everything kind of looks the same. Then depending on how you're exposing your footage, when it comes around to correcting it, your footage will react differently. And then depending on what correction LUT you put on your footage will also change the way your footage reacts. You can get these correction LUTs anywhere on the internet. I make some, Sony makes some, many other creators and companies make them. And each one will affect your footage in a slightly different way. And I'm not saying that there's one better than the other. It entirely depends on how you perceive your footage to be. Some may affect the skin tones in a really nice way, some may not, but the greens or the blues may look really nice in some others. And ultimately, it's a case of going through and checking to see which one gets you to a good starting point to then take your footage and grade it. Or if you want to bypass the whole correction LUT process, then you just need to learn how to process the footage to be able to correct it yourself from scratch. but spending the time learning how to expose the footage and correct the footage will massively improve your image quality later on down the line. It will give you a greater flexibility when it comes to grading, and in my opinion, you're much more likely to be able to nail your desired look, and being able to nail the way you want your grade to look will massively help with your storytelling. I do a lot of one-to-ones with people, and I also talk to a lot of people over on Instagram, and they always say to me, should I shoot in S-Log3? If you want the best image quality and more flexibility for grading, and that is all a priority for your content, then yes. However, perhaps you have a YouTube channel and the color grading and the way your image actually looks in terms of the colors isn't a massive priority for you. Maybe to reach your audience and get your story across, you don't need the best quality footage. If that's the case, then maybe stick with S-Cinetone, save yourself some time, speed up your workflow, save yourself a headache. Now, for those of you who are like, no, I want to shoot in S-Log3, whatever you do, learn how to do it in your own time. Not when you're doing client work, not when you're shooting a wedding. Sometimes in them situations, there's no opportunity to be able to redo the project if you make a mistake. The process of being able to shoot S-Log3 starts with exposing your footage to shoot S-Log3. So I recommend you watch this video right here where I explain exactly how to do that. Subscribe if you want to see more from me, and if you do, I'll see you right there. See you later. Bye-bye.